Thank you, John, for that kind introduction. And thank you to Sally and all of my Loeb family for making this experience here at the GSD thus far so wonderful, and for what I know is going to be for the remainder of our time here even more wonderful. I'm honored and humbled by this opportunity to be here with you and today, and to in each of you for all coming out today for this presentation. So as John said, I've spent more than really half of my professional career in the creative industries. I've worked in film, I've worked in fashion, I've worked in the music industry. From the early 90s to the mid 2000s, I worked in various creative capacities, art directors, creative directors, wardrobe design and styling. And my formative years in design started in London, at the American College in London, in UK, where I was trained in the field of fashion design. I received a partial scholarship to study, and I was introduced in my second year of university to textile reclamation and reuse as a sort of a form of apparel industry activism. I was involved with a group of activists, art activists, who were sort of camping out around the corner of my university. I passed by them and also Oxfam Industries, which they had a relationship with. And it was a time when I was understanding really the depth of the fashion and apparel industry, and understanding that I didn't want to contribute as a student to degradation and exploitation that the industry is so known for. So I got engaged with them. It was sort of a refuse for me. And when I returned home back to the United States, I returned to Atlanta, Georgia in 1993, I replicated that model and began to work with, again, artists, music industry folk, to try to get my clothing and to get my advocacy out to the general public. I also started a nonprofit organization, one of the first in the country to address environmentally sound clothing production. And I also started a for-profit recycling clothing company. And again, I partnered with charitable organizations, I partnered with Goodwill Industries, I partnered with a curbside recycling company to take textiles and move them through and turn them into wearable art. So most of that work took place the early 90s to the early 2000s. The other half of my professional career and most recent practice has been working really what I'd like to say my way back home to these small sort of rural places that John had mentioned before. It's known in the region as the Black Belt, but it's really the southern United States. My generation, the generations before, really left for what people often term as a better quality of life. And where I grew up was a small rural town, part tobacco, part textile town in North Carolina. And what I'm going to do for most of my presentation today is talk to you a bit about that journey going back, and how that, explain how the idea of a regenerative practice is central to, and has been central to my work from the beginning as a practitioner in school, university, and then also how over the years it's evolved sort of more of a political and economic social container in agriculture. And it has been really a way for me to examine that context in this country, and a pretty complex history. Really what is a pretty deliberate destruction of the African American farming legacy here, So after working in the field of sustainable development for many years, I decided to re-enter academia. I pursued community and regional development from the University of California, Davis. I was lucky enough to find a very interesting field program that allowed me to stay in a rural community, to create my curriculum with leaders in the field of sustainable agriculture and food, and economic development. So a big influence on my work when I was invited to speak, I guess I was around about 24. The years go by so fast. Oh my God. I was invited to speak at the annual Pioneers Conference in 2001 in California. And I met J.L. Chestnut, who's a notable civil rights attorney from Selma, Alabama. And he gave a keynote address about a historic litigation, the Pickford case. It's known in the media as the Black Farmers Lawsuit. And it was, at that time, the largest civil rights settlement in the history of the United States, with the government paying out more than $2.5 billion to thousands of poor African-American farmers nationwide, and where thousands of acres of farmland that literally had been halted from production as a result of discriminatory practices by the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, were desperately trying to be put back into a viable production. Another influence, heavily influenced, was the book Dumping in Dixie, Race, Class, and Environmental Equality by Dr. Robert Bullard. And it addressed several issues that centered on equity, fairness, and the struggle for social justice by African American communities in the South. It's a really important book. Many of you may have it. It does a very good job showing how African Americans making up the southeastern region's largest racial group also share a disproportionate share of our nation's economic and environmental problems. So this book breaks down limited housing and residential options, and combined with discriminatory facility practices and how they've contributed to the imposition of all types of toxins in African American communities through the siting of garbage dumps, hazardous waste, landfills, incinerators, smelter operations, paper mills, chemical plants, a host of all other polluting industries. So the region that I'm speaking of is known as the Black Belt. It is known for it gets the name for its dark, rich soil, and it also gets the name, as you can see from the graph, for the majority population of African Americans. So the information that was being introduced to me through J.L. Chestnut, through a lot of mentors in the field, environmental justice activists, made me much more aware of some of the complexity of land settlement patterns that are very unique to this region. And I just began to understand this history as a young person, began to question the idea of sustainable development and rural land use planning and development. And I was asking myself the question, like, what could a place that on the one hand was saying it was a place of beauty amongst settings of forests and streams and fertile fields, but was also a place that existed as a region on average that ranked the highest for individuals living in poverty, for example, 40%. It also ranks the highest for families living in poverty, 36%, 4 times the national average. I was really concerned enough to want to hear firsthand from the families that I read about and heard about. I interviewed over 500 families between Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Louisiana. I heard stories, firsthand stories, where, for example, a county or a city had placed a toxic waste dump less than 100 feet from a family's 150-acre homestead. And how for maybe 4 decades that family had drank well water and that they had been poisoned by a landfill. To quote one resident, "We were all sick and the government seemed to be waiting for us to die." So from there, I decided to go back to academia. I didn't think that my fashion degree was going to be enough to get me to a position of solving. So I decided to go back to school. I mentioned that I got connected with a very good rural development leadership program that allowed me to stay in the community, And I started researching sustainable rural economic development, specifically focusing on the region, a place-based curriculum, if you will. That was a really important piece of my development process, professional development process, because it allowed me to understand the theories of development in real time and develop in partnership with the families, the local solutions to the local problems, create these environmental mechanisms, and again, to experiment with my regenerative practice. And so when I speak to the idea of regenerative practice, it's the practice that I'm speaking about is really about the roots of agriculture in this country, and not just the practice of, for example, regenerating land. It's about also families and people that we as humans are operating within an ecosystem, as well as I'm also talking about the historic destruction, again, of the African American farming legacy. But the idea that is something we can regenerate when we regenerate agriculture. So in response to the growing number of African American families in rural communities that had lost their ability to access and manage emerging markets and regional potential for nature-based businesses, I developed the Social Enterprise Development Initiative in 2009, Sustainable Rural Regenerative Enterprises for Families, with holistic approaches designed to combat some of these issues. Our programming is built on a community-based platform. We seek to connect families to the sustainable development, community development, architecture, rural land planning disciplines, so that they can engage in hands-on projects that help them thrive on their family land, and then also live in more equitable communities. Our first initiative was a project designing solar-powered water. That image that you see there in the middle is a woman who is holding a hose, and she's watering her crops, and she's also filling a truffle for her cows. That's a fairly common practice in the South. You'll see a lot of water solutions, excuse me, that are used from water hoses. So we needed to come up with something that was going to be a little bit more dependable, and so we started this project. It was the first women and minority-led solar irrigation project for historically underserved producers in the state of Alabama. It was basically a technical assistance and capacity building project. We provided a range of assistance to small water systems, including identifying, securing consultants. We provided engineering, economic and environmental studies that are required for system operation, and also help with families who wanted to actually apply to the USDA and had sort of estranged relationships, help with funding applications. That project became so popular that we developed a curriculum. We felt the need to actually expand the environmental literacy beyond water and soil regeneration. So we developed in partnership with the Ecology Center at Berkeley in California and a whole host of educational specialists, what we call the CRE program. It's Education and Environmental Literacy Curriculum Project. It's really an empowering empowerment project. It has a very comprehensive environmental and job readiness curriculum. We've got 10 modules. It's really the equivalent of an undergraduate degree, but it's specifically designed for people who have been failed by the education system. It's also a social enterprise piece to it, which allows at the end of the curriculum the development of a business plan for investment back into your community in any one of those businesses. We've trained 17 leaders from throughout 5 states in the Black Belt. We're now implementing this program in partnership with these leaders in their own communities. So this is just a couple of examples of how the CRE, soil regeneration, a particular module is practice in the field. It's a regenerative practice, it's a soil building technique, and it's combined with solarized irrigation. This may not seem like a big deal, but it's when this is something that's happening, it's putting our families well on the way to being able to have a sustainable enterprise. This is a place, these types of systems are created where their electricity is not available, or where the use of electricity can help in promoting sustainability and increase production. We've got things like land-based pumps for irrigation, as well as providing powering for the watering livestock. We've got other designs in our curriculum that include solar-powered cooling systems for dairy and beef cattle, wells and pond aeration, watering systems for cattle requiring large head pressures, and so on. This is a cover crop. A lot of our focus right now is on building soil, providing carbon and putting carbon back into the soil. It's one of the ways in which farmers have the power to actually mitigate climate change. Still not a widely known practice amongst our families, but it's something that we are providing and helping with that practice. Just another cover crop. Only 1% of all agricultural land is using cover crops, so we're also in partnership with other investors about how we can actually get this, as we're building the soil, get this product to market. So Ford Foundation approached us, along with a handful of other grassroots community-based groups in the South, to work on a wealth building initiative. They had heard about the success we were having with local communities. They wanted to invest in us to expand sort of the equity piece of the model. And what happened is we developed, along with them, an indicator process that's holistic. It has 7 indicators that measures wealth. As again, I talked a little bit about the skills education piece. That's one of the intellectual capital or intellectual wealth pieces. There's also the individual piece, where you're in social wealth, where relationships are strengthened. Obviously, there's the environmental, and then the built environment is the next piece of it that we are really focusing on now. So we piloted this project in a community, a small isolated community known as Gee's Bend. I wanted to show you this because this is a sample of just the types of built infrastructure, the structures that are pretty widespread amongst our communities. These are historic buildings. The two that you see on the right-hand side, they're Roosevelt homes. They were built in the late 50s, mid-50s. So for a 2-year planning process, we worked closely with the community. We worked closely with other stakeholders in the state of Alabama. We brought them together, anyone who was interested in tourism really, and who was interested in economic development and cared about the cultural production of the region. Brought them together and began to work in behalf of the community. The community led the process. We were invested in as an intermediary. We held the process. A huge part of this model, this wealth creation model, is an assessment of social capital. It's based basically on a determination of whether structures around local ownership and or control of wealth have been built or developed. And so structures around local ownership and control include ways that communities and low wealth individuals can own and control their rural assets, whether through local, individual, or shared ownership. A baseline measure, for example, for us started with the community mapping those assets. You see that little pink dot in the middle, that little A is, when we did our GIS mapping with them, that's the only asset that was listed. Once we completed from the community mapping process, those are the assets that we identified, just the built environment. Some of those include cemeteries. Many of those structures are cemeteries. But the importance of this is that the community is taking on the development of these assets. They are developing a local ownership governance model and plans for the development of these assets. So our partnerships also include lots of universities. This partnership piece here is a student from Auburn University. Again, it's the typical process of working with the community to vision and get their ideas out. G's Ben wants to transform their small one-room building where they do all of their cooperative development around quilt production into a cultural and arts center. So the success of the model so far has led to lots of other leaders from other counties in the state of Alabama and across other state lines to approach us and to want to adopt the model to develop tourism in their communities. Just to think back about a couple of slides, there were a couple of homes that are empty. We also have been developing these homes for homestays. Our practice runs of this, for example, can bring anywhere from $300 to $500 in just one weekend to a family. And so that's a huge contribution. Again, the word spread pretty fast that was an opportunity. And so this is a county, Macon County, people may know of Tuskegee University. It's another Black Belt county in Alabama, where they now have been working with us. They've been trained in the CRE regeneration processes. They are building their soil. They've mapped how much agricultural land is available, and they have their eyes set on a cluster of opportunities around built infrastructure that they are working to develop. In partnership with us. So before I close, I just want to say that there's a lot that I could share about what has come out of that process, but I think the biggest thing is now that we've formed a regional tourism network, and our hope is that we will be able to see these leaders, invest in these leaders, invest in their communities, and seed many more sustainable community development projects. We want to be able to work across the Black Belt, across the 7 states, from Virginia down to Texas, Louisiana. Again, supporting those founding community leaders. Regional impact is what we're calling the Black Belt Community-Based Tourism Network. The framework has been set up, and what's really powerful about it is again the local sort of governance that's happening. There is a sort of shared sense of responsibility between what has been many times separated urban environment and urban development to the rural. We've been able to, because of the pathway into these rural places, you've got to go through an urban hub. So we've been able to connect through the destination, the routes of planning, and sort of a collective management process to get from one point to the next. So this project alone is enhancing sustainable economic development. It's preserving local heritage. It's in quality of life. It is working in areas that are historically oppressed. It is experimenting with innovative governance styles. We are inclusive where we have not been. We are building trust and moving through stakeholder participation and creating cultural tourism management as a form of community development. So my Loeb year, what I really want to do, what I hope to get out of this year, I want to continue to strengthen social, natural, and built environments. When I think about strengthening and enabling environments, I think about control models. And those models that are designed to help keep wealth local, again, as I mentioned, and help keep wealth from being extracted. So things like community fees and taxes, special fees or taxes that are levied by cities and states, outside general funds. I've seen models where these have been earmarked to create community wealth assets. I want to learn about those. Real estate transfer taxes, impact fees, system benefit charges, value recapture taxes. So folks that are in real estate and any related field, I'd love to partner with you. Community endowments. I've been on the front end of a conversation around impact investment, and so we're working with community foundations. These new community models of funding, ideas about land banks, even community forests, how they actually serve as assets for communities, expanding the community benefit agreement model for protection of communities. I'm also interested in critical conservation and environmental justice, of course. I'm very interested in the cross sections of environmental research and policy, the development of tools that enhance and opportunities for local community-based organizations to use frameworks that shine light on issues beyond what we've been working in, sort of locally unwanted land use, better known as LULUs. I want to be fluent in the kinds of framework that address environmental inequities in planning, zoning, and development in neighborhoods of color in the rural South, and also in similar communities throughout the world. And of course, regenerative design in agriculture. There's an incredible absence of design in mainstream agriculture. The education of how to produce for beauty, how to care of the soil, and efficiency and management are very hard to find in academia. You can get a PhD in agriculture engineering, but it's very difficult to even find a class in agricultural design. So I think it's a mistake to avoid this aspect of design in favor of what I think is an over simplification of agricultural practice. We know about the danger of this through monocultures, chemicals, and heavy mechanization, which is indicative of the culture that and mindset of domination and control of nature, rather than one of collaboration and understanding. So I'm very interested in seeing what a curriculum might look like around agriculture design, and there are a lot of other people who sort of share that sentiment. And that's pretty much it. Thank you.